She wore the uniform, showed her ID, and followed every rule. So why did 2 officers still slam her in cuffs? The answer cost them everything. There wasn't anything unusual about the stretch of road outside Gahanna, Ohio. It was early, just after 7:30 a.m., and the chill in the air hadn't quite burned off. Sergeant Tamika Drury had driven that road 100 times before. She knew every bend, every pothole, every crooked road sign leading out of her neighborhood and toward the highway. Her 2014 dark green Toyota RAV4 was running low on gas. She hadn't eaten yet, so she figured she'd grab something small at the station before continuing on to the reserve base in Whitehall. Drill weekend. She didn't love it, didn't hate it either. It was part of her life, her rhythm. She pulled into the Sinclair station on Morse Road, tucked just behind a strip of shuttered businesses and a Dollar General. Not exactly the nicest part of town, but far from the worst. Tamika was in uniform. Fatigues pressed, boots tied tight. She wore her name patch and rank proudly across her chest. Her duffel bag sat upright in the back seat, packed the night before with her field gear. She glanced at it as she stepped out, feeling that same tug of discipline she'd carried for the past 12 years. Army Reserve wasn't her whole life, but it kept her grounded. As she slid her card into the pump and selected regular unleaded, her phone buzzed. A message from her mom checking in. Tamika smiled. "Always before a drill," she muttered. She typed a quick reply, then opened a protein bar and took a bite while the gas filled her tank. She didn't notice the white Chevy Tahoe pull in 2 pumps over. Not right away. Inside the SUV sat 2 uniformed police officers from a nearby suburb. One younger, tall with buzzed hair, the other older, heavier, and quiet behind mirrored sunglasses. The younger one pointed toward Tamika, said something that made the older man shrug. Tamika was putting the nozzle back when the first voice called out. "Hey, excuse me, ma'am." She turned. "Yes, officer." "You mind stepping away from the vehicle?" She blinked, confused. Is something wrong?" "Can you do it now?" he snapped. There was something in his tone, not just authority, but suspicion. It made her stomach tighten, but she stepped back, hands visible. The older officer got out and stood off to the side, saying nothing. The younger one approached directly. "You got ID on you?" "Of course," Tamika said, reaching slowly into her uniform pocket. "I'm headed to base. I'm Army Reserve." She held out her military ID with one hand and her driver's license with the other. The officer glanced at them, barely looking. "This uniform isn't a costume," she added quietly, not moving. "Who said it was?" he replied. "Got a call about someone loitering and acting suspicious, just doing our job." Tamika didn't say anything. Her eyes moved to the older officer. He still hadn't spoken, just watched. "You sure this ID's legit?" the young one asked. "Excuse me. You heard me." She exhaled slowly. "You think I'm impersonating military?" He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step closer. "Turn around." Tamika blinked. "Are you detaining me?" He raised his voice. "Ma'am, I'm giving you a lawful command. Turn around, hands behind your back." She looked at the older officer again, hoping for reason. But he nodded once, not sympathetically, just to signal compliance. Her fists clenched before she turned. "This is a mistake," she said, "and it's going to cost you." Her hands were yanked back, cuffs clicked tight, too tight. She winced, but didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Someone across the lot yelled, "Hey, what's she even doing? That's a soldier!" The younger officer turned his head, annoyed. "Back off!" But Tamika wasn't thinking about the growing crowd or the eyes on her uniform. Her mind was already on the call she was about to make from the cruiser. The back seat of the police cruiser smelled like old vinyl and sweat. The door slammed shut behind her with a cold finality. Tamika sat upright, wrists still cuffed behind her. Her breathing was steady, but her jaw clenched. Her name tag was half twisted from the way they'd grabbed her. She stared out the window, watching as the younger officer swaggered around her vehicle like he'd just cracked a case. The older one stayed near the cruiser, arms crossed, eyes scanning the gas station like he was bored of the whole thing. Tamika spoke loud enough to be heard through the small opening in the plexiglass barrier. "I want to call my commanding officer." The younger one didn't turn. "You'll get your phone call at the station." "That's not how this works," she replied firmly. "This uniform gives me the right to contact my base immediately when detained." He finally turned. "You're being held under suspicion of impersonating military personnel. That's a federal offense." "Sit tight." Tamika didn't flinch. "I'm not going to sit here while you pretend this isn't racial profiling," he smirked. "No one said anything about race, lady. We got a call. We responded." She leaned forward. "You looked at my ID. You saw my license. My tags are in the window. You ignored all of that and cuffed me anyway. Why?" He stared for a moment, as if trying to decide whether to answer. Then he turned and walked away. Outside, a small crowd had gathered near the sidewalk. 2 young men were filming with their phones. A woman in scrubs yelled something about knowing her rights. The air buzzed with tension, the kind you could feel in your teeth. The older officer got into the driver's seat, glanced at her in the mirror. "You should have just kept quiet." Tamika looked him dead in the eye. "You should have just done your job right." She turned slightly, as much as the cuffs allowed. "Can I use my phone or not?" He hesitated. Then he muttered, "Make it quick." He reached around and dropped the phone into her lap without unlocking the cuffs. She maneuvered it awkwardly, twisting to tap the screen with the side of her thumb. 2 quick swipes. 1 number. It rang twice. "Tamika?" The voice was sharp. Alert. "Byron, I'm cuffed in the back of a police car in Gahanna. They say I'm impersonating military. I showed ID. They don't care." There was a pause. Then, "Who's the arresting officer?" "I don't know yet. No badge names shown." 2 of them. White SUV. Sinclair Station off Morse. "I'm 5 minutes out. I'm calling command. Keep the line open." The call went quiet, but she didn't hang up. The older officer looked at her through the mirror again. "Who was that?" "Your lawyer?" She didn't answer. Outside, the younger cop walked back toward the cruiser, now visibly agitated. "We're getting heat out here," he muttered to his partner. "Somebody's already posted video. It's hitting Facebook." "I said 5 minutes." Byron's voice came again. "You hear me?" "I hear you." The younger cop leaned into the window. "Who's Byron? Your boyfriend?" Tamika raised an eyebrow. "Try Colonel Byron Keene, 3rd Battalion Logistics. You're about to learn his name real well." That hit differently. The cop's jaw moved slightly. He stepped back, uncertain now. The energy was changing. More people were recording. A car honked as it passed. The woman in scrubs yelled again, this time at the cops. "She's military, idiots!" But the officers didn't move fast enough, and Tamika knew the clock was ticking on whether this ended quietly or publicly. Colonel Byron Keene hadn't slept much the night before. That morning, he'd been at his desk early, halfway through his first cup of black coffee, when his goddaughter's call came through. He recognized the tone in her voice immediately. Not fear, not panic, but control. Controlled anger. Controlled humiliation. Byron wasn't just a ranking officer. He was the kind of man who made things move when others stalled. Born in Dayton, hardened by years in deployments and bureaucratic politics, he'd seen systems work, and he'd seen them break people. He wasn't about to let it break Tamika. He tossed the coffee aside, grabbed his car keys, and dialed on Bluetooth as he pulled out of the lot. "Dispatch, this is Colonel Byron Keene. I need to confirm the location of Officers Dorsey and Linford. I believe they've detained a service member at a gas station off Morse Road." There was hesitation on the other end. "Sir, we don't typically—" "I'm not asking for typical. I'm requesting verification of an incident involving one of my logistics officers in uniform, reportedly accused of impersonating military personnel." The line went quiet. "We'll check and update you, sir." "Good. You've got 2 minutes." Byron's next call was to a buddy in the city council. "Pull traffic cams and see if there's a cruiser sitting near the Sinclair on Morse. I need confirmation, now." Meanwhile, back in the cruiser, Tamika sat still. Her phone call hadn't ended. The line remained open. She wanted them to know someone was listening. You still with me?" Byron asked again, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here," she said. "Crowd's growing. People are filming. Stay where you are. Don't move. Don't speak. Let them bury themselves. Too late for that." She glanced up at the younger officer, who was pacing now. He pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, we've got a situation escalating. Civilian interference. Requesting backup." Tamika laughed under her breath. "Backup? For what? One woman in cuffs?" That comment didn't go unnoticed. The younger officer snapped. "You need to watch your mouth, lady." "Or what? You'll press harder on the cuffs?" The older officer interjected from the front. "You're not helping yourself. I'm not here to help you feel better about what you've done," she shot back. Byron's voice came back strong. "They're trying to cover themselves now. I've got 3 calls out, including to public affairs. Video's coming in. It's already moving." And it was. At that very moment, someone had posted a 90-second clip on Twitter. It showed Tamika being handcuffed in uniform while trying to explain herself. Her calm voice contrasted sharply with the officer's tone. It was already being retweeted by local journalists. Inside a newsroom across Columbus, a young editor named Raina Cortez noticed it while scanning for leads. She clicked play, frowned, and then picked up the phone. "Yeah, we've got something brewing near Morse Road. Military woman cuffed in uniform. You want me to follow this? Go. Get me interviews. Check if she's still on site." Back at the gas station, more cars had pulled in, but no one was leaving. A woman in a red hoodie called out, "I got the whole thing on my phone. She told y'all she was military." The younger officer finally turned to the older one. "We messed up. We should have checked her credentials properly. We can't walk it back now." Tamika turned her head toward them. "You still think I'm wearing this uniform for fun?" The silence that followed was heavier than the cuffs on her wrists. A new police SUV pulled into the lot. A lieutenant stepped out, a middle-aged black man with a buzz cut and no expression. He didn't approach the crowd. He went straight to the cruiser. He tapped on the window. "Sergeant Drury?" She looked up, surprised. "Yes." "I've been informed by Colonel Keene and reviewed the footage in real time. We're correcting this now." He opened the door himself and carefully uncuffed her. "On behalf of this department, I apologize." Tamika didn't say anything right away. She stood slowly, rubbed her wrists, and looked directly at the 2 officers who had cuffed her. "You're not sorry," she said flatly. "You're just caught." But the apology wasn't the end. It was the start of something much bigger, and Tamika knew it. By the time Colonel Keene arrived at the Sinclair station, the lieutenant had already cleared the scene. Tamika stood beside her RAV4, arms crossed, jaw tight. Her duffel bag was still in the back seat, untouched. The pumps had long stopped running, but she hadn't moved. Byron stepped out of his car without a word. They made eye contact, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he gave a slight nod. Not approval, not relief, but acknowledgement. She'd held her ground. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Yeah, just mad." "Good, use it." Across the street, a local reporter was setting up a mic, trying to snag witnesses before they scattered. One of the bystanders, the woman in scrubs, was already giving a detailed account, phone in hand. "They handcuffed her in uniform," she said into the mic. "Didn't even ask questions. She had ID. She told them. And they still slammed her against her own car like she was lying." The video clip from earlier had hit over 60,000 views within 2 hours. By noon, it was at 180,000, and the comments weren't subtle. How does this still happen? They saw a black woman in uniform and still didn't believe her. "Fire them both." Byron was already 2 steps ahead. He had emailed the city's Office of Police Oversight, attaching both the civilian footage and the bodycam videos acquired through back channels. He CC'd the base commander, the city attorney, and the local military liaison officer. The footage didn't lie. It showed Tamika calmly stating her name, providing credentials, asking if she was being detained. The younger officer barely glanced at her ID before turning her around. No warning, no confirmation. But worse were the few seconds caught on the bodycam after she was cuffed, when the officers thought their audio was muted. The younger one had said, You think she's one of those fake vets? They've been pulling that stuff all year." The older one chuckled. "Real or not, she had an attitude. Let her cool off in the car." Byron stared at the screen as the footage played. Then he said out loud to no one, "Idiots." That afternoon, the police department held a quiet internal meeting. The two officers, Dorsey and Linford, were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The PR rep wanted to release a statement immediately. The chief disagreed. "Too soon. Let it calm down." "It won't," someone replied. "Not this time." Meanwhile, back on base, word had already spread. Tamika's fellow reservists weren't surprised. Anger simmered beneath the surface. Not loud, but steady. "I've been in 15 years, one sergeant told another. "Never once got cuffed in uniform. Wonder why that is." Tamika didn't want to speak publicly. She ignored interview requests and blocked unknown numbers. She wasn't chasing headlines. She didn't need applause. She wanted accountability. Byron called again that evening. "You sure you don't want to put out a statement?" She sat on her couch, still in uniform. "No, the footage speaks louder." He was quiet a moment, then said, "They're going to spin it. Try to paint you as confrontational." She sighed. "Let them try." That night, one of the officers, Linford, gave an off-record comment to a local paper. He claimed the incident had been blown out of proportion and said Tamika escalated the situation by refusing basic commands. By the next morning, it backfired. More footage came out, longer angles, better audio. A retired Air Force major even commented on a live segment. "If that woman had been white, they wouldn't have gone near those cuffs." The department's silence only made things worse. But behind the scenes, decisions were being made, and they would change the course of both officers' careers in ways neither of them saw coming. By Friday morning, the footage had reached every major outlet in Ohio. It was no longer just a local incident. It was a headline, the kind that opened morning broadcasts and took over social media timelines. Army reservist wrongfully detained in uniform. Body cam footage sparks outrage in Gahanna. Woman in camo cuffed at pump. What went wrong? The Sinclair station where it happened had become a landmark overnight. News vans lined the street. Reporters asked passers-by if they'd seen anything, if they'd heard of her, if they thought the officers had gone too far. Inside a bakery down the block, people argued over coffee. "She showed ID. That should have ended it." Cops get calls like that all the time. Maybe they were just being cautious. You can't caution someone into the back of a cruiser with cuffs, not in uniform. At her home, Tamika stayed quiet. The phones hadn't stopped ringing. Some calls were from reporters, some from strangers offering support, and a few ugly ones telling her she should have complied or accusing her of pulling the race card. She let most of them go to voicemail, but she read every message from fellow service members. One said, "I've served 22 years. Never imagined I'd have to warn my daughter that even a uniform won't protect her." Another, "You did what many of us couldn't. You stood up while sitting still." That one stayed with her. Meanwhile, the department scrambled. The mayor called an emergency press briefing. He stood stiffly beside the police chief and mumbled through a prepared statement. "This city does not tolerate profiling or misconduct of any kind. We have launched an internal review. We are in communication with military leadership and will address the matter with full transparency." But transparency came late. That afternoon, the Office of Police Oversight released a preliminary review, confirming that both officers had failed to follow standard identification verification procedures. More damning was their disregard for protocol involving military personnel. It was written clearly in their manual, procedures both officers had signed off on during training. Community groups rallied outside City Hall. Signs read, "Cuffed for serving," "Uniform protection," "Justice for Sergeant Drury." Tamika's name was now everywhere, even though she hadn't spoken to a single reporter. She had become a symbol, not because she asked for it, but because people saw themselves in her. At a nearby high school, a teacher paused her government class and played the footage. "Watch this closely," she said. "Then tell me what you see." Not just what happened, but why it happened. And why it keeps happening. Back at the station, the chief was under pressure. "We need to act," his deputy said. "We've got every local outlet breathing down our necks, plus 2 national networks looking to pick it up. Do we fire them now or after the review?" "Fire them yesterday," the deputy muttered. Inside a quiet meeting room, officers Dorsey and Linford were brought in separately. Each was told the same thing. "You're being placed on immediate unpaid suspension, pending termination for conduct violations, failure to follow identification protocol, and unprofessional conduct." Dorsey tried to argue, claimed he feared she was a threat. "She was unarmed," the board member replied. "In uniform, with ID. And you cuffed her." Linford didn't argue. He sat down, said nothing, and signed the form. When news broke that the officers had been removed, reactions poured in. Some cheered, some called it overdue. A small segment defended the officers, saying they did their job under pressure, but the majority saw it for what it was, a wrong that had finally met consequences. At a small gathering that night, veterans lit candles outside the reserve base. They didn't chant, they didn't shout. They just stood there, in silence, in support. One of them, an older man in faded fatigues, held a sign that simply read, "We know what she stood for. Do you?" But even with accountability beginning, the question hung in the air. What happens next for Tamika? And what happens the next time it's someone else? Tamika sat on the edge of her bed, hands folded in her lap. It had been nearly a week since the gas station incident. She'd taken 1 day off from drill, just one. She didn't want people looking at her differently, treating her like some victim, some symbol. She wasn't interested in being anyone's cause. She just wanted her respect back. Her boots were lined up by the door, clean, laces tucked. The uniform hanging from the closet looked the same as the one she'd worn that morning, but everything felt heavier now. A letter slid under her door around noon. Not an envelope, just a single sheet, folded once. She picked it up. "Sergeant Drury, on behalf of the Gahanna Police Department, we extend a formal apology for the actions taken against you on the morning of March 12th. An internal review has confirmed multiple violations of protocol by officers Dorsey and Linford, both of whom have since been terminated. This letter does not undo what occurred, but it is the first step in our acknowledgement of wrong." It wasn't signed by the chief, just printed with his name. That told her everything she needed to know. A few days later, she was invited to speak at a city council meeting. They wanted a statement, just a few words. She declined. Politely. She didn't owe them anything. Instead, she drove to the VFW in Reynoldsburg. A few older vets had asked her to stop by. Nothing formal, just talk. Inside, a group of men and women, black, white, Latino, sat quietly at folding tables, drinking black coffee and listening. Tamika kept her voice steady. "I didn't want this. I just wanted gas and a protein bar. But I couldn't ignore it either. Not because I was angry, but because I know there are kids watching. And I can't let them think silence is the answer." Someone clapped slowly. Then more joined in. But she held up her hand. "I don't want applause. I want change." Back at City Hall, change came quietly. The department issued new guidelines for handling service members, including mandatory ID verification steps and required retraining on racial bias. A new liaison position was created between the department and the nearest reserve base. Small steps, but they happened. One of the younger officers at the precinct, Officer Reeves, sent her a message through the liaison. "I wasn't on shift that day, but I've watched the video 10 times. I'm sorry for how they treated you. I'm going to do better." Tamika read it twice before forwarding it to Byron. He replied with one word: progress. But progress didn't erase everything. At her local grocery store, a woman whispered to her husband in the next aisle, "That's the soldier who was on the news." Some looked at her like a hero, others with judgment, like she'd stirred the pot too hard. She didn't react, just kept walking. One Saturday morning, she ran into the woman in scrubs from the gas station. The woman introduced herself as Patrice. I just want you to know, Patrice said. You weren't alone that day. I saw it. I got your back. Tamika smiled for the first time in days. Thanks. That matters. Byron visited the following week. They sat on the porch, eating barbecue and watching the sun dip behind the trees. You did good, he said, biting into a rib. I didn't do anything special, she replied. Exactly. He nodded. That's what makes it powerful. She looked out at the street, quiet and still, and finally let herself breathe. But even with justice served, the weight of it all hadn't lifted completely. Because Tamika knew this wasn't about her alone. It never had been. It didn't end with the apology, or the firings, or the headlines. Those things came and went. But the conversation stayed, in quiet circles, in family kitchens, in training rooms where officers sat through new videos and listened to new instructors telling them what they should have known all along. For Tamika, life picked back up. Drill weekends, work, errands. The usual, but something had shifted. People treated her differently. Some with a little more caution, others with open admiration. A few with thinly disguised resentment. She didn't spend time sorting them out. What mattered most came in the form of a single envelope that arrived 2 weeks later, no return address. Inside was a letter from a young woman named Darla Reynolds, a 19-year-old who had just enlisted in the Army Reserve and had seen the video online. I didn't think I could do this, Darla wrote. I've always worried about how I'd be seen, if people would question me, if they'd think I didn't belong. But I saw you, calm, proud, strong, and I knew I could do it too. Thank you for wearing that uniform and not backing down. Tamika held the letter for a long time. She'd never set out to inspire anyone. She just didn't want to be humiliated without reason. But maybe that's what real strength looks like. Not a big speech or a protest, but standing firm when someone's trying to erase you with a single gesture. Her story wasn't one of violence or shouting matches. It was about silence being broken in the right moment, by the right voice. That one phone call, calm, precise and made under pressure, had changed everything. Colonel Keane, always blunt, summed it up best when they met again for lunch. You didn't panic. You didn't yell. You let them expose themselves. That's why they lost. Tamika nodded. Yeah, but they'll try it with someone else. Somewhere else. Probably, he said, setting down his fork. But the difference now is people are watching. He was right. The gas station had new cameras. The police department now required extra training before officers could return to active patrol. Community liaisons were meeting monthly with local military reps to talk through issues before they became news stories. And Tamika, she stayed quiet publicly, but never silent privately. She wrote letters to other service members who reached out. She spoke at small veteran events. She answered every message from young recruits asking how to carry themselves under pressure. But she also made time for herself. She got back to running. She went on road trips again. She visited her godmother in Cincinnati and cooked gumbo for a group of kids who'd never tasted it before. Because surviving a moment like that doesn't mean you live in it forever. You heal, you grow, you move forward. And sometimes you hold the system accountable, not by raising your voice, but by refusing to be dismissed. For every person who said, "That's just how things are," Tamika's story quietly replied, "They don't have to be. Not if you know who to call, not if you stand your ground, not if you remember who you are, with or without the uniform. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the importance of being seen, respected, and heard, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, speak about it, and most importantly, subscribe for more stories that matter. Stories that remind us what quiet courage really looks like.